thanks for joining. This discussion emanates from, I think, all the things that we've seen in industry, all three of us and many other people that we have conversations with about how so many companies, and particularly in the manufacturing sector, not only in South Africa, but in Africa and the rest of the world where we operate, see the challenges that we face with performance and getting businesses to perform with best practices, with technology, with artificial intelligence that's becoming such a big topic nowadays. And I think companies are a little bit confused, or many companies are confused. Where does this come from? How do they bring these different worlds together? And one of the purposes of this discussion is to try and unpack some of that, unpack why do companies struggle? Where does this come from? And what are they going to do about it? Because you can't just implement technology and think you're going to see the results, and you can also not walk away from technology and think you're going to be competing with some of the companies that do have information available. So just to start off the conversation, I'll start with my background, just so everybody understands who's part of this conversation. As I said, I'm Arend Brink. I'm a mechanical engineer, grew up in the pulp and paper industry, and worked in different challenging environments for a while. CCI GrowthCon became part of that about 25 years ago. We've been privileged to work all over the world in very complex manufacturing environments, many different industries. What we particularly are good at is operational excellence, supply chain excellence across the whole value chain, and that's where Hyram and I met each other when you were still in a management position in that industry. Maybe you want to run us through your background, Hyram, if you don't mind.
Sure. So I'm Hyram. I've got a background in electronic engineering, did a master's using neural networks, so that's where my interest in AI kind of started, I guess. And then a background predominantly, a little bit in banking, but predominantly in supply chain and manufacturing, as Arend says. And that was with AB InBev and SAB Miller. So I think where we met was, so I was vertical operations director for Africa, for Maltings, looking at 5 factories across Africa, and then we'd actually just built a new factory in Elroad, and we were going through commissioning and operational readiness, and you can imagine that running the two together in parallel was mayhem, and that's where we kind of needed your help from an operational excellence perspective and from an operational readiness perspective. So that's where we.
And you are in the artificial intelligence world now.
Yeah. So
data and AI.
Yeah. So when I left AB InBev, I thought, with the STEM background and having done, my studies using neural networks, I thought, let me get into that. It's pretty easy because we're all engineers, so we understand how it works, and it comes quite easily. And now I'm getting to understand how to converge the two worlds, so manufacturing, data, and AI, and now operational excellence.
Yeah. Correct. Johan?
Yeah, so how did I end up at DataProphet, basically? So I'm currently head of services at DataProphet, where we focus basically on manufacturing and technology solutions for that industry. I started off as a mechanical engineering undergrad, worked 11 years for a big industrial company in South Africa. At the end of my career, I was tasked with the operations of making fertilizers and explosives. And there we had a plant that's underperforming, as you alluded. How do we get places from underperformance to high performance? In that journey, I discovered the most kind of critical factors being people and systems. And what do I mean by systems? I got to use a lot of data to not just evaluate the performance of what the plant is doing, but also what is my systems delivering to me. And there, a great passion for me was created through my careers, understanding that if we can combine this crux of people performance with data and system performance, you can really achieve high-performing entities. And yeah, that led me through my career also then all the way to DataProphet, where we actually now at this pinnacle of solving from both improvement methodologies, taking people along for a ride, but also leveraging the data and the data sources available on an operational entity to also unlock opportunities for performance. So yeah, that's
Right.
why I sit here today with you, Jim.
Thank you. Because everybody has X amount of resources, but one company performs at a high level of efficiency compared to the next one. And when Hyram and I met each other, as he explained, in industry, he was on a path where he had to get that particular business in maltings up to a certain level of performance by engaging people, which he carved out a path for. But what you guys just explained from a DataProphet point of view is you're now sitting in a very different capacity, looking at information through using very powerful technology, and way down the line, once you've got good analysis, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but good analysis, to then understand what that information tells you, and then taking the next step towards something like artificial intelligence. So maybe what we can start with, we are both wanting the same thing. We are wanting to help businesses that struggle with performance to get the best out of their people, use the information at their disposal,
Right.
make better decisions, and increase performance in the same way. And we want to do it in a sustainable fashion. So maybe what we can start with is, your perspective would be great to tell us, what do companies actually struggle with in this world of information right now? Can you maybe share your perspective on that?
I'll go first, and then so Johan deals with them every day. So I think most of them that come to us, right? The first question is, I have outdated infrastructure. I have data that the quality of the data is not good, and then I know there's an inherent, probably implied sunk cost if I'm going to get my data infrastructure right. And then lastly, how do I integrate all of this so that I have one unified view of my data so that I can actually do something with that data? That's the first question that gets asked of us pretty much most of the time. So before you even go to AI, this is the big thing. And then secondly, you will have read probably only 15 to 20% of all AI applications kind of are successful. And that's probably because a lot of manufacturers are in kind of POC limbo. But I think also the most important factor driving all of that is the lack of change management capability. But understanding what change management in a manufacturing environment actually means, and not, say, in a banking environment. So you're typically going to deal with things like SOPs, daily routines, and all of these manufacturing specific contextual things, which makes it very difficult to get ROI out of any technology that's deployed in manufacturing.
Can I just ask, before we move on to you, Johan, so information is not new. AI is new, and proper analytics is new. But companies have been, when we normally start engaging a company about information right down the shop, let's use a manufacturing company as an example. And this could be in a hospital, in a ward, where the nursing staff are looking at certain numbers for them to make sure that they achieve certain things, within a shift, all the way through to a bank, where there's a production line producing certain processes. And what we are very familiar with is in the manufacturing environment, where operators are producing a bottle of cool drink, and they've got a machine running in front of them, very complex machine, lots of information coming towards them. Where we would normally start that process is for people to understand what are they responsible for, what is information that they note down that the machine tells them. And then over the years, companies became a little bit better in the sense that they started putting information out and putting it on a dashboard. And you would see some factories that actually had, or still have, dashboards up in the factory environment where there's information available. Not all of them use it effectively, but it is there. Can you maybe just contextualize, when you say your kind of information, when you talk proper data analytics, how does that compare to the old views of just having information on the dashboard available?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that comes to mind is probably one of the core practices that you often deal with is visualization. Another core practice would be root cause analysis or problem solving. So typically when something goes wrong in a factory, root cause analysis could take a long time. So it means different engineers and different people in different areas of the business collating, or at least collecting a lot of data, analyzing that data, and then trying to find the root cause. And typically by the time that happens, a week has passed. So just finish the question.
Yeah, it was this difference between when people in the past, maybe 10, 15 years ago, started
Yes.
putting dashboards up and where we are today.
Yes.
I think it's a different place.
It's a different place. So you had SPC, for example. You can see your SPC charts in the control room, and then now you've got to deal with dashboards and real-time data. So it's a different world. I think what's also slightly different is that if you look at the traditional control theory that engineers use, is they might be looking at two parameters, and they're looking at whether these parameters are in control or not. And then they are in control, or at least the SPC charts and the charts in the control room indicate that they are, only to find that quality or throughput at the end of the game isn't where they expected it to be. And that's by and large because these processes in manufacturing are not linear. They're non-linear, and so when they change one or two of those parameters, they might change 5 or 6 parameters down the road. And so what's changed is that our data enables them to see that effect at the end of the game, which they couldn't see beforehand.
And just for the audience, people are not linear either. We often employ a workforce to produce a certain product at a certain time, but if somebody had a bad discussion with his friend the previous night, he might run the shift differently. So we'll probably almost never have complete linear processes where you put this in, you're going to get that out. Because there's variables, there's people involved, there's information available. It's not a linear line to make this product and sell it at that profit, because it always comes at a cost and at a cost of efficiency.
Yeah, and I think that on the positive side, where things have really changed also is if you're doing a loss and waste analysis. So again, you've got to get data from different sources and you've got to analyze that data. What AI and data is doing is enabling you to do a probably more accurate analysis, more precise analysis, and then things like predictive analytics enabling you to do more sophisticated optimization. So when you align that with the leans of the world, you get a supercharged operational excellence.
Correct. Johan, your view on what companies are struggling with in terms of information and the challenge thereof?
So if you quickly think about data, there's kind of two succinct sources. There's what a factory is telling you through sensors, and there's typically this cohort of data that's generated by governance processes. And what do I mean by governance processes? Typically quality control or shift reports. It's somewhere there's a business process enforcing somebody to take information down of a success of a process or the state of a process. And you can also immediately intuitively realize they're very different in their nature. The sensor will measure whatever's in front of it regardless of what's happening that day, good or bad. Where we have kind of governance processes dictating, it's very much many times also subjective in interpretation. So why am I saying all of this? Noting this is there's a lot of things where you almost have human out of the loop, where there's a lot of opportunity to see what that information can tell you, but a real richness only happens when you can correlate that information with the process captured information downstream as well. And they typically, now framing it in the challenge, is where the challenge lies for many manufacturers. Because the sensors will measure, but getting the work practices and processes aligned to constantly measure your output of your process in a consistent fashion is a very big challenge. A simple fact of, we alluded to people are not linear just now. Your quality inspector today is not feeling so great, so he might miss a few quality defects in his visual inspection after the shift. But there again, data is your friend. If we can help create proxies or line of sight to inform what the quality of your data capturing is, it becomes a useful tool again. And I think what we see a lot of time in manufacturers is to get your data to a state of health where you can actually start using it not just for advanced ML techniques, but just having trust in your data to make daily, weekly, monthly operational decisions as well. And I see that as the fundamental building block. Yes, we sell ML and AI techniques, but a lot of our service-led approach is helping you build a database of information and data you can actually trust and make decisions on. 100%. That's the first key challenge to solve for. Running to AI from day one is the wrong place to go. So let's
Yeah.
first check the veracity of the data set we have to work for, and then have line of sight of improvement action. So now we leverage the continuous improvement mindset to improve your data set that you collect as well.
Yeah.
And the subsequent upside of that is this does just not prepare you just for AI, but it helps all your internal processes, loss analysis, your daily meetings, all the other processes that's dependent on data as a consequence also then improves because of that. But the first kind of point of view is always, let's get the data into a state where we can actually trust it.
Can we quickly talk about what kind of companies are struggling with this? You know, people can access, children can access information on their phones, and it's analyzed to an extent. So if the world of work that you're in, what kind of companies are struggling with information, and maybe we should talk about why. I know you've said some of the answer now. So what kind of companies are struggling with information, maybe too much information, or it's not integrated, or it's not interpreted, and why are they struggling? Can you give your perspective on that? Should we start with you, Johan?
Yeah, so we have in our customer base, from a maturity perspective, you get operational mature, unmature, but also data maturity. Everybody has struggles. It's just how wide and how deep the struggles go. So what kind of companies are struggling with it? So some of our advanced customers is struggling with integration of data sets and systems. That's typically the struggle to get there. Because you might have a lot of information floating around, but how do you consolidate it, overlay it, or even combine it? That's one of the succinct challenges. Then on your lower level of maturity is just, where do we actually spend either the capex or the effort to start collecting relevant data? And for you to start collecting relevant data, you first need to know what's your goal, or why are you even embarking on this journey to collect data or start creating information around this process. So I see that almost, if I have to put two categories, as the consolidation of data challenge, but then also where do you start collecting additional information if you don't have it on a system represented yet? And how do you create momentum behind that? Because at the end of the day, it's a business. You need to understand your goals that you're chasing for the rest of the actions you take to also make sense downstream of that.
Any views from you?
Yeah, so which is why I think our partnership is key. Is depending on the level of maturity of manufacturing excellence of that particular client, they're often unsure of where to start the data journey. So one, just to make it tangible, one question I got was, we're about to embark on our manufacturing or world-class manufacturing journey. When do we implement the data journey? Do you implement them together? Do you implement the one first or the other one later? Typically the thinking is world-class manufacturing excellence, or lean, or whatever it is, first, and then other stuff later. And that's what we see a lot of them also struggling with. So in their journey of traditional operational excellence, where do they incorporate the data journey or the AI journey? And that's not an easy question. So there are different views out there that the data AI question could supercharge the traditional approach. There are views out there that if you don't do them together, then you're not going to get that sustainable reward. I mean, you look at manufacturing excellence, so you've got sustainable practices, and then you've got your KPI performance. So the whole idea is to get sustainable performance out of the plant, not just performance today and then tomorrow you don't know what happened. So there's that thinking that if you incorporate or converge the two worlds, you are going to get sustainable performance out of your data. So that's a very tricky question. It's more of a strategic question.
Yeah, and I think what a lot of people underestimate, a lot of companies, is that change is difficult. Changing people is difficult. So if I'm the CEO and I'm confronted with improving the profit margins of the company, the market is there, I can sell my product, but we're not running very efficiently. So I think a lot of companies think that if we just spend X amount of money on tech and AI, it's going to solve those problems. Because it's difficult to change people. Mm-hmm. It's easier just to buy tech and AI, in some people's perceptions, and get some of the efficiencies through that, but not realizing that to make use of the technology and something like artificial intelligence, You need people on board with the journey, and you need the whole people. You need everybody to buy into what are we going to do with this information, and how does it empower us. People use the word operational excellence a bit loosely. There are so many methodologies out there: Lean, Six Sigma, total productive maintenance, total productive manufacturing, reliability-centered maintenance, total quality management. There are all these methodologies that have been floating around for 50 years. Something like 5S, which is a very basic practice, which I've been trying to implement in my home to big resistance of some of my family members, is supposedly an easy thing to do. You know, if you want to have a neat, tidy, safe environment, make sure there's a place for everything and everything in its place. But companies struggle with it. Why? Because people are not linear. People don't just do what you want them to do. And I guess that's where we get confronted so often with companies asking us, what do you do? Now, we do operational excellence. How do you kind of understand that? And when the conversation starts evolving, we have to go to the place where, what are the real basics of the journey, which is that a lot of companies who are competitive understand that to get my profit margin up and is very often locked into being more efficient. So not necessarily cutting costs out of the business, like restructuring the business, retrenching a whole lot of people, selling off printers and coffee machines, not necessarily that, but actually take what you've got, the machines that you've got, the people that you've got, and letting that run at much higher levels of efficiencies. So what operational excellence to us means, we'll talk about supply chain excellence just now, means that the people who make the money in a manufacturing environment are the people on the shop floor. The ones touching the product, touching the machines, run the machines. And that happens 7 days a week, 24 hours a day in most manufacturing environments. So operational excellence is not when the bosses tell people what to do all the time. Operational excellence is when you empower the operator to work safely at 2 o'clock in the morning, because he or she sees something unsafe. And because they've bought into what this company does and what we are here for, and now my contribution towards the KPIs and the goals of the company, I am now respecting that situation and dealing with an unsafe situation. Or, you know, somebody's not following a standard operating procedure, or somebody's not doing the maintenance correctly. A boss or a team leader or a supervisor cannot be there all the time to manage those things. We have to empower the floor. So operational excellence to us means that the company's got goals and objectives, and that is cascaded down, not forced down, cascaded down to the very lower level of the organization, where you actually have an operator and an artisan and a quality person and a health and safety person working alongside each other and asking themselves, I'm not coming to work just for a salary. I'm here to fight for the business existence. So to do that is the process of what we call operational excellence. How do you get those people to engage properly, understand the numbers of the business, understand that at their level, which we call goal alignment, and then making the goals visible. So when they come to work in the morning or shift, they see the numbers, they ask the shift from before, where did you operate, what did we lose, what are we going to make in the shift, and then they fight to make those targets. And you mentioned the word root cause analysis earlier on, is when then something doesn't happen the way it's supposed to, is that team then will try and find out what happened here so that we can correct ourselves, so we can still achieve the output. And so many companies misunderstand that when they talk root cause analysis, it is a tool to hammer the people on the shop floor. Why did you make a mistake? That's not root cause analysis. Root cause analysis is empowering the people on the floor to do that themselves. And we're going to talk about the information and the impact of that just now. So when we talk about value chain excellence or supply chain excellence, you now look at the broader picture, the typical CEO picture. So not just the operations director picture, or even the managing director picture, it's the whole CEO picture. So in other words, we're trying to sell a product into the market. There's an inbound supply chain side of the business. There's the make part of the business where we manufacture the goods and services. And then there's the outbound supply chain side. So what we often see is, and we want to talk about information when it comes to that as well, is let's say you fix the operational side of the business by implementing really good practices. Often the bottleneck for you not producing competitively is maybe in the inbound supply chain side. We're not planning properly. We're not procuring properly. We don't have a good sales and operations planning strategy. And then the bottleneck could be on the back end, you know, the logistics, the networking, distributing, customer engagement side of the business. So when we talk about value chain excellence or supply chain excellence, it is what does good look like if you look at a business? If it's a hospital, what is the very best hospital out there? And why are they so good? Is it the combination of people, leadership, information usage, technology? There's a bunch of things that make them successful. And so often companies, when they look at either the manufacturing side of the business or the supply chain side of the business, they don't change because they think they're good. Good in comparison with who? You need to benchmark yourself with the very best people out there, and then ask yourself, because today companies in Africa can compete with companies in South America and outperform them, and they do, because the same practices apply. Maybe cost of goods are cheaper here than over there, but the same efficiency rules apply. So why I'm giving this context is when we started talking about information, Hyram, when we started engaging, some time ago, I was thinking, what has happened over the last 10 years since information has become more available? And certainly what we have seen in a company where the practices are quite mature, they absorb it. They love more information because they are now on top of their SPC charge, the statistical process control charge, short interval control, they're on top of it. Like if you look at a filling line in a brewery, the filler is the core of such a line, and the filler operator is a very key person in that line. And that filler operator has information coming at him or her that he or she needs to act on. So when information, if it's mature, the line's running very well, production is very stable, to give them more information helps them a lot. But in an immature environment where everybody's firefighting, now you're putting all these, you buy electronic screens, you put them up, and you just see people walking past them, not paying attention to them at all. If you go and ask somebody, what's the information on that board? They look at it and say, no, the foreman knows. Or that guy knows. Because they disengage from it. Because all they're trying to do is survive. They're just trying to survive the shift. And the artisan is being pulled backwards and forwards all over the show because there's a breakdown there and a breakdown there. Don't give me more information. That's a lot of rubbish. But if you ask an artisan, your job card needs to have 8 hours of work on it, he'll give it to you. Because that's what the foreman is expecting. I'm not saying everybody does that. There are some good companies out there. But what we've certainly seen is that that hasn't changed a lot for us. If a company is immature and they're struggling to add more information on there, it doesn't always help. But at the same time, and I want to talk about that further a little bit more a little later, is machines running well is dependent on preventive maintenance. And preventive maintenance is dependent on us inspecting the machine, sometimes visually, and data has made the inspections much more accurate. So you can plug sensors onto machines to give you more real-time condition monitoring information, which makes it easier. So even in a reactive environment, if you do that correctly, it can empower the foreman to know what the condition of the machine is, so we can plan when to bring that machine down and overall maintain it. So certainly from our side, from an operational excellence perspective, we have seen the shift where companies sometimes use information as a cop-out because they actually need to change the maturity of their practices, but they think it's easier to buy 150 million rands worth of technology. Or actually go understand the maturity of the business and say, if we are mature and our practices are running well, but the next step is to become better at information, let's talk to a company like DataProphet so we can understand how to integrate our data, use all the different sources, start understanding it better, and then take the next step. For them it would be sensible. And I'm asking a question now. If a company approaches you and say, what is DataProphet all about? We need information. Artificial intelligence is a hot topic. How can you help us? How do you then deal with, if you look at that and you say, oh, this is very immature. There's immature practices, how do we go? So maybe if you can just give your perspective on operational excellence in the older days, now we've got information. Is there anything you want to add to what I've just said that can make sense?
I'll maybe build on this. I think what's hasn't changed and most probably will never change is enemy number one is variance. And it's not, and we can classify it a bit lower. It's variance, sources of variance. If you don't know what the source is or the cause is, how do you even start to fight your way out of it, basically? And then also what's very difficult for companies, if you have so much variance coming in, that's firefighting, as you mentioned. You can have the most best intentioned solutions in place, but you might be fighting noise instead of managing a trend. Very easy to say in retrospect, while you're in the midst of this battle, it's not very easy to see. So step one with a company is let's also try and see from the bigger picture, CEO view, but in our space more operationally, what's your sources of noise? And can the data tell the story to distinguish between just sources of noise or trends that's actually emerging? And that also kind of builds to the Pareto view of the world. Can you actually see the 20% that's causing you 80% of the heartache? If we can make that connections for a customer and then instill some view that can help them manage to see if this noise is reducing, because that becomes such a powerful tool. If you fix something, does it remain fixed? Because also, let's be honest, many times a problem is solved only to creep back 2 months later, and now we misdiagnose it as something new because, oh, but we did solve it, so it must be something different. Having that line of sight is an especially powerful tool. Also in the world where manufacturers is asked to be agile, think what that means. You cannot be agile if you have a lot of noise surrounding you. Because how do you even move your position in a space where you don't know what your levers are for control? Understanding noise, being able to classify which you can control or which you just have to live with, is a very powerful mechanism for manufacturers to move forward.
Sure.
I think the journey for me always is based in reducing noise or reducing variance, in using the most appropriate tool to your disposal. Sometimes it's work practices, and data and information is not even a tool.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the combination of both, and there I get excited. If you can combine people, process, and technology, it becomes a very powerful mechanism to not just identify noise or variance, but also systemically fix it and ensure it remains fixed and solved.
Yeah.
Now you see that organization from a performance perspective leaving his peers behind because they've sustainably fixed stuff. But the side consequence of this, and yeah, I think it's a difficult one to articulate, but people that go through this journey gain so much process knowledge and understanding of their own operations. Because you see it from a new perspective, and a new perspective is the data and information. Previously, it's always just word of mouth. We struggled with this machine, we struggled with that machine.
Yeah.
But if you actually start to see the trends the data tells you, it becomes a very, very powerful tool to help yourself out of this situation.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Let's unpack that. My mentor, who taught me maintenance, always used to say to me when we used to go into businesses to understand how mature are they with maintenance, because we would typically get called by companies that are in trouble. They're not performing, and they need, first of all, a quick fix to get performance up to stay in business, but secondly is to do that in a sustainable way, so that our strategy as a management consulting company, the philosophy that we follow is we should extract at some point. We cannot be there forever, otherwise we're not passing on the knowledge. So our strategy is to help collaborate on fixing that problem that exists. Why are we not performing? Why are the machines not running? It might be poor reliability, it might be poor production management, it might be a poor supply chain, but then put practices in that will help those teams to sustain that performance going forward. So what we want to leave them with is competency and capability to learn the whole time. And then obviously combining information is to bring information in so that it's a more powerful way for them of seeing that. My mentor taught me data does not lie. And especially with the accuracy of data today. You can't be reliant on opinions anymore. The data does not lie. So let's talk about combining these tools. I think some companies see combining best practices and this very informative world that we now have through technology and availability of information as nice. But I think the words that you guys often use is it's actually critical.
Critical.
Can you give your perspectives on that? So, and maybe we should start with you, Hyram.
Yeah.
Why is it critical and not just a nice to have?
So there's a thing we often talk about, data or AI readiness. And I think for me there are probably three key things for a perfect customer to be ready. It would be that they have a continuous improvement mindset, and they have standardized processes. And it talks to your point around if that's their thinking and that's their culture and their mindset, then the acceptance of data to use it for continuous improvement is quite easy. Secondly, they need interconnected systems, they need a good OT infrastructure, IT infrastructure to be able to use that data. And we've spoken about the infrastructure and the data and the normalized data and the unified view. That's the technical side. And then the the other side that they need is their change management capability. So implementing change, as I said, in a manufacturing environment is difficult. They need to realize that when we bring in data, we can do stuff that maybe the traditional lean approach couldn't do. So, for instance, you might be able to enforce an SOP, but we can check whether an SOP is actually being implemented or not. We can enforce measurable control plans using data. So those are important. And then why is it critical? It's because I think if you think again around loss and waste analysis, so you'd go into a business, you want to find the gaps, you do a loss and waste analysis. Data is going to give you a more accurate, more precise view more quickly.
Where your losses are.
Where your losses are. You're going to get a more sophisticated way around improvement. And then I think also to Johan's point, data enables you to remove the variability in the plant, both external and internal. So imagine you've got different operators coming across different shifts doing or having their own interpretation of the control plan. Can you imagine the variability in quality and throughput in the plant? So it's critical to remove that, and data can do that. I think the other thing is, and Johan's kind of mentioned it, around line of sight. So you get line of sight of your end-to-end process. That enables you to be more flexible, more agile. And then I think also you want to boost the traditional manufacturing excellence principles like PDCA. You know, having the data enables you to plan or have a view of 20% or 30% of the key parameters that drive that process. The data and the technology helps you to do the check and the act quite quickly. And then finally, one of the tenets of lean is empowering people. And the reason I say you need to converge the two is because imagine in a lean environment or a world-class manufacturing environment where you empower the people by automating certain processes and letting them use their brain to do more effective type work. And in that way, you're actually empowering and getting more engagement out of your workforce from the bottom all the way through to the top. And then finally, I think in terms of alignment, I mean, we've spoken to Dino and we've often asked the question as to what made the likes of SAB Miller really good. Was that thing you mentioned around goal alignment and the cascading of KPIs. That's incredibly important when you implement technology or even data and AI. So, if we give you an example, let's say you don't have that. And so you go into a customer and the customer's asking for a very specific use case like the eradication of scrap or defects. And then when you're doing your change management, you ask them, so how significant is the KPI compliance to your control plans or scrap, so your scrap percentage? Well, we're driven by volume. That's not such an important KPI. It's like, well, then how do you expect the technology to work? And if that's the case, often the question in our minds is, where do you start? Do you change the operator's KPI? Or do you go back to the top and do the whole goal alignment exercise from scratch? It is a question that I was keeping for you, by the way. Is that if you're going through an implementation like that, do you start right at the beginning again? And so that's why I think it's absolutely critical to combine these two worlds. For me, that last point was the most important.
So just before we move to you, I think what you've highlighted, what's quite important is that when we walk through a factory the first time, I mean, depending on the size of the factory, it could take us a couple of days to understand what's really going on. If somebody says to us, listen, we are not performing, or performance is not sustainable, or we've got quality issues, or we've got a very reactive culture, whatever the problem is, before we put any solution out, because we don't have a blue and a red pill like in the Matrix that you just swallow and your problems go away. People are not linear, so you can't swallow a pill. We always, and we don't believe in silver bullet solutions. So we have to find out, like you guys, we have to find out what's going on, where's this business at, so we can identify what is the solution that they need to implement, and let's collaborate on building that joint solution. When we do that the first time, we always need to understand what's the culture and what is the maturity of this organization. And so often you walk into a room where, like in a manufacturing environment, the numbers are posted on the walls, like the last 24 hours or the last couple of weeks, and some of the charts are outdated. But when you speak to the guys on the floor about the performance, they say, no, we know what we're doing, but they're doing it informally. So the board is just up to keep the boss happy, because the last couple of hours or the last 2 days have not been updated on the board. So immediately you get a feeling that there's a disconnect with the information. So to come back to your question about, do you start at the top, do you start at the bottom? If the people who make the money for this business, who touch the product and control the machines, don't have clarity on what they're doing, how they're supposed to do it, how to do it in a standard way so there's a little variance as possible. You know, it doesn't matter how we're going to do this KPI process. If that's not right, then we might not be making money, because we're not controlling what we're supposed to do. So the question then is, how do we fix that? Do we start can we do that by starting conversations here, or do we go back to the top? But that's a whole lot of a big discussion. But if you've got people at the bottom of the organization not knowing what they are doing and exactly why and how, and doing it consistently in the same way across all the shifts, we're not efficient.
Yeah, and if you have the MD or manufacturing director saying, okay, I'm not sure I want to change the KPIs at the bottom to reflect scrap, as an example, I'm just using that as an example, then you kind of got to go back to the whole start around the data and AI journey, because it needs to be a strategic decision.
Sure.
What are your strategic objectives?
Yes.
Is AI or data even the way, or the method of addressing that? And what are the key objectives you want to achieve as a business? Is it cost reduction? Is it the improvement in capacity, because you don't want to build another factory? So if that discussion hasn't been had, then you're going to have that lack of clarity at the bottom in terms of what KPIs they should be chasing. And you'll quickly you will encounter it maybe halfway through the implementation, or even through running the business, because the guys are going to go, well, we don't have scrap KPIs, why should we?
Yeah.
And the MD is going, well, we actually don't need it. Then why did you implement the data solution?
Yeah. And I want to ask you one question, but before I do, sorry, Johan. Maybe one of the questions one should ask is, if you've done the strategy for why do we need artificial intelligence, or do we need more information? If the answer is yes, is the next question, are there things that need to be put in place before we do that? So for instance, if I want to put technology in, am I ready? Am I ready for it? How do I get my people involved? What change management needs to be done? So probably part of the strategy, and I'm asking a question and giving the answer in the same sentence, probably part of that strategy should be is once the leadership team accepts and understands there is an opportunity in information, is to then agree as what's the process to get there. Because if we are ready, we can do this, this and that. But if we're not ready, we first have to do this and get that in place and get understanding, and we'll talk about the solutions. Johan, can I ask you, how can we, I've heard you guys use the word supercharge an engine. Can you talk about that? Like, how do we use good information management to supercharge this manufacturing engine?
So I always like to think in simple terms, and metaphors is a great method to do that. So I typically refer to the work practices at a company as the engine. Because if you think about it, if you have unhealthy work practices, this is the engine leaking oil. So if the metric is making power for that engine, the likelihood of you making consistent power is not very high. And that's a people process. Your people and a process, how mature are they? How good is this engine? Is it a nice V8 purring, or is it 1200 or 1.2 barely starting? If that's not in place, adding technology, and I call technology the supercharger or the turbocharger. Adding technology to a bad performing engine will only break that engine in all likelihood. If you have good practices, that's just what Hyram mentioned, if you have standardization and a continuous improvement mindset, that's a healthy engine. Now if you add technology, now it gets exciting, because now you add a turbocharger to an engine to make exponentially more power out of the same fundamental base you have going. at the place.
Is that the difference between noise and good analysis?
100%. Think of an engine that's not well maintained as a very noisy engine, is it not? And the kind of the metaphor combines in that sense. You have this engine rattling away, you don't know where to start looking. Adding a turbocharger to it will in all likelihood increase the noise.
Yes.
And that's the danger of employing technologies. You don't understand what you're fixing with it.
Yes.
You in all likelihood can create more various sources of noise in the implementation. And it comes back to goal setting and clarity of business KPIs that you're chasing. Is my engine suited for this goal? Where it really gets exciting, Arend, is if you have the maturity as an organization to start designing your engine to accommodate technology as supercharger. Think in a mechanical world, if you design an engine to accommodate the supercharger, it's much better than retrofitting a turbocharger. It can still be a good solution. But you have that mentality of starting to design, think about lean. Lean falls flat many times, not because lean is not a great methodology, it's just sometimes the effort involved in doing it makes it unsustainable. Now let's design the lean implementation with where can we use technology to reduce the effort of the implementation cohort. Now you start to see an engine that's being designed for supercharger. And those opportunities and customers that gets that is, to be honest, the customers that will get the most out of this combined journey. And that gets me very excited personally.
And can I quickly ask on that is, will there ever be a case where you will do one or the other? Because some companies will say, you know, I don't need data and I don't need information, you know, I need to go into the best practice route, you know, lean, operational excellence, whatever the case may be. Other companies might be of the opinion that, you know, stuff the best practices, you know, we just want information. Will you ever be in a situation where it will be one or the other, or is it a question of how do you understand what you need from both worlds? What in your view is the solution?
I'll take the first step on it. For me, the one cannot live without the other, is my honest opinion. It's always just the magnitude of how deep you need to go in each dimension, given your current context and problem you face. But for me, the people process side, your methodologies to improve is critical. You cannot do away with it. If you want to keep up in a competitive space, in my opinion today, you cannot ignore the value add that can be done by including data and information sources in your journey towards operational excellence or high performance. So, yes, you can always do what you want, but you'll be missing out on opportunity. So it needs to be both, in my opinion. I don't see, it will not be a strategically wise decision to be either or. But it's also, in fairness, do the reflection to see where the two worlds actually supercharges the initiative. Because if you do it in an unplanned fashion, you have an opportunity to create more resistance and noise and variance if you don't do it in a strategically minded fashion.
Did you have a view on that?
Yeah, I'll talk about the specific risks of not combining these two worlds. Not now, but a little bit later. But essentially, if you don't combine them, I think it talks about sustainable improvement. So your world is about getting sustainable improvement, not being able to improve your KPIs today and then tomorrow you don't know how you got there. And I think if that is the premise of what you do, then you want sustainable improvement using the data as well. So you've got to embed the two. And then I think also most importantly is the thing around people. So, you know, getting I 4.0 implemented in an industrial environment is not easy. And world-class manufacturing or manufacturing excellence is actually premised on change. Like as a plant manager, if you don't know change management, then how do you continuously improve? Because continuous improvement implies change, right? Yeah. And how do you install those new standards and new practices every day, or new ways of doing things? That's change management. So unless you combine the two worlds, those are the two areas that I think you're going to fall on. And that's why you read that a lot of these AI and data implementations aren't returning the ROI that you need to return. So for example, let's take root cause analysis. Root cause analysis, you might use data instead of world-class manufacturing, and the data will bring out some patterns or whatever it is around the root cause. But but you might not, you might see the symptoms through the data, but you don't get down to the real root cause. Or if you implement only the data, you might miss the human impact on a particular production process. So you've got to do them together.
Yeah. This is a good conversation. I really hope the listeners get the value out of this.
But I do want to mention something, and we've been saying it in very different ways, but I want to explicitly pull it out again, is this concept of meaningful work. Arend, you said it, how do you engage the people on the bottom of the floor? You said again, we need people to change their behavior. And I'll tell a simple story. If you stand, you're operator, you make a part, and you work very hard today, if you don't even know how much parts you made that day, it doesn't feel like a meaningful day, does it? But having the simple fact of having a counter, the simplest kind of metric to say, oh, I made 1,000 parts today, yesterday I only made 800, I did better today than yesterday. All of a sudden you unlock this meaningful work mentality, and I think that's the opportunity. For you to make change sustainable, you want to make it meaningful. You make it meaningful by being able to track improvement,
Sure.
or if you're going the wrong way.
Sure.
That makes it meaningful work, and I think that's kind of this golden thread tying all of this together. By visualizing the right stuff at the right time,
Yes.
for the right people, you make your work on a daily basis meaningful. And that's the opportunity in front of us to do as well.
So that's a great point, and that's where I had a question for you. So globally, from a data and AI perspective, one of the issues that manufacturers are having is, I mean, you saw the Great Resignation after COVID, but the shortage of staff in Europe, or workforce in Europe, skilled workforce, and in the US. And then one of the tenets of what you guys do is an empowered workforce, an engaged workforce. In your view, from your experience around manufacturing excellence, can data and AI create a more engaged workforce? Can it in some way alleviate the problem around skill shortage? How do you, what's your view around that whole issue that manufacturers are?
I think always, but I think this whole picture that we are trying to sketch is not a one element picture. There's different success factors to it, the integrated picture. So absolutely, if information is made available to the right people at the right time for better decision making, it's going to make them more efficient. Will you be able to retain those people better? Probably. If if the companies, because I think Arend, and like you mentioned SAP Miller before, how good they've been over the years with the competency acquisition process.